The following interview is with Frank McLaughlin of McLaughlin Lofts. Frank has been flying at the top of the race sheet in the Boston Concourse for nearly 50 years. He's also been very successful at One Lofts. His pigeons have done very well here in the States and in other countries, and has an awesome YouTube channel where he tells you all of his methods with feeding and training and how he manages his pigeons. This is a little over an hour conversation with Frank. It is an awesome discussion, and I cannot wait for you all to see it. Please, if you want to see more, hit the like button, subscribe, and please leave a comment on the video, letting Frank and I know what you thought of it. Please sub to Frank's channel as well. Thank you. Well, first and foremost, I appreciate you joining me today. It's going to be a lot of fun getting to talk with you. We got to meet, I think, in 2022 at the Hoosier.
Yes.
So that was a lot of fun getting to be there and experience all that. They put on a great event there. So it's good to meet you in person. And so I'm looking forward to talking with you today.
Well, that's good. I'm excited about it too. I appreciate you asking. So that's great.
Well, let's start out with how you got started. How old were you? How did you get involved, and where did it begin?
Well, I was thinking about that today. I got started fairly young. My father was into chickens and he loved animals, and we lived in the city. So I had like chickens and ducks. I remember in kindergarten bringing the kids over to see my chickens and ducks. So I had to be about 5 years old. And after several years, I might have been 7, we'd go to farms and we'd look at, chickens, hens. I could have hens. I couldn't keep roosters. And if I liked something, my father would buy it. I'd add it to my flock. And one day we visited a farm and they had white fantail pigeons. And I liked them. So my father bought me a pair. And the next couple years, they kept reproducing way up high in my chicken coop. So I went from 2 to maybe 12. And I thought one day, oh, these pigeons are overrunning my chicken coop. I'm going to let some out. So I opened the door. I chased out 4 or 5 of these white fantails, and they flew roof to roof all around the neighborhood. After about an hour, they came and landed back in my yard. And I opened the door to the chicken coop, and they walked back in. And I was like,
wow,
this is unbelievable. I was just blown away. So I said to my father when he got home from work, he was the tree warden for the city of Quincy. And I said, Dad, I tell you what I just did. And he goes, oh, I know a guy with homing pigeons. You might like those. So within a day or two, we went and visited a guy in the city that he knew. And my father just thought he had homing pigeons, but he raced. And I saw the nest boxes and the red checkers and the clocks. And my eyes lit up even more. And the chickens went. We gave the chickens away. The pigeons came. So I was 10 years old at the time when I first got my racing pigeons, but I loved it. I was hooked from a very young age.
So you got them at 10 and started to, experiment with them and learn. And then when did you decide you wanted to race? How old were you when you went that route?
I started racing in Young Birds of 1974. So I had just turned 12. So that was my first season. And at the time, I thought it was all handler. I was under the impression that it was just, it didn't matter what you had for pigeons. It was just all the handler. And my dad, he loved them, but a lot of people think he started me, but he never touched a pigeon in his life. He never handled a bird. He couldn't still handle a bird after being around them, for nearly 50 years. And so I started competing and as a 12-year-old, and then I hit my first big race at 16. I won a big futurity, and then at 18, it all came together, and I swept all the big futurities in Boston, and they were 100 loft futurities. I mean, they were big. It was big competition at the time, and at 18 is when I hit it, but it was because of one super bird that I fell in love with, and my father bought it for me. So a good pigeon made all the difference in the world.
Right. And so what was it that was it just trial and error where you learned how to care for them? Did you have any mentors or anything like that as a kid, or how did you get to that point where you were able to do that?
I mean, as a kid, I would spend most of my time with, Vin Sharafa. He still races even today, and he hasn't changed a bit. he's, it's kind of funny that I still see him the exact same way. And I'm sure he still sees me as the 11-year-old kid that walked into his backyard. My cousin knew of a pigeon fancier in his neighborhood. And again, he said, oh, he lives over there. We walked in and, I've been best friends with Vince my whole career, but he was my early on mentor of, really all my information for the pigeons. And we still talk pigeons to this day. We go back and forth and over, yeah, 50 years later.
Wow. That's a long time to be in it.
Yeah, it's crazy. When I think about it, I mean, if I'm in it another 30 years, hopefully, yeah, I'll have a long run in this sport.
Absolutely. Well, I think you've had as successful a run as anyone over the 50 years, and that's why I'm excited to talk to you today. And um, so tell the audience about your location. What time of year does young bird start? What time of year does old bird start? It's a little different up there with the weather and everything than it is here in Oklahoma and down south.
Yeah, so I live in well, in Massachusetts. It's part of New England, and we pretty much have every climate possible, from hot, humid summers to cold, heavy snow winters. It's not the nicest place, I think, for climate wise, but we start racing the old birds about the third week in April, and we race them to the end of June. And what I find unique about, our old bird season is we start and it's cold and damp. It's rainy and it's just, we may get some snow and going into the low 30s Fahrenheit at night. And then we finish the season with high heat and humidity. So we'll end up, racing 90 degrees and, tough, hot days later in the old bird season for the long distance races. So we pretty much have, the gamut of weather during the racing season, with May, probably from early May to early June, where it's just beautiful, 70s and just perfect pigeon weather. But the rest of the time, it's not the greatest. And then young birds begins towards the end of August, and we race from the end of August to just about the 1st of November. And again, we start in the high heat and humidity, and then later in the fall, it's pretty cool. It's not really cold, but it's cold, and the days get short. So we kind of had an interesting climate to race the birds in.
Yeah, you have to be able to adapt on the fly to what's going on with the weather and adjust. Your pigeons have to be able to handle and adjust, right?
Yeah, and I find that a lot of people ask me, well, I'm going to try your systems. And I offer a lot of my systems out on YouTube, as you know, and they say, well, I'm going to try your system, but I live in this climate or I live in that climate. And no matter what climate they live in, I race in the same climate at some
It's
part of the year.
yeah,
So I say, yeah, my system works whether it's, 95 degrees and high humidity or 33 degrees and rainy and damp. I'm racing the same systems, and the success is there. It doesn't matter. The weather hasn't affected them. And a lot of people, there's, the old wives' tales that, oh, if you feed a certain this, the birds get too hot. Or if you don't, somebody contacted me recently, if they didn't have corn in their mix, the feathers will get brittle. And it just, but there's stuff that's perpetuated down from, our grandfathers that raced through our fathers, through us. And some of these things that people apply have no, it's ridiculous, but it's just common in the sport that people are doing it only because, they did it for generations before them. So, but
and
I do race in all climates. And
that's one of the things I really enjoy about your YouTube channel is you've made your system, easily accessible for people to get on there to learn, and you also have it to where if someone's busy, they can still use your system. And I think that with the way things are going with, the sport having less and less numbers of people, if we want more people involved, they're going to have to find a way to be able to do it with less time, less space, simpler, right?
yeah, and that's I think what's been the most the biggest evolution for me. Like I was a maniac until my 30s. Like I mean, I didn't miss a beat. I would do everything. I was highly competitive, and then you get busier and busier. And when I got married, then it became a point where I wasn't living at the lofts. So that causes a whole nother issue where you just don't have the time and you have businesses and family. So I try to create systems that are very easy, very little work, and I still want to be competitive. I mean, I don't put in a fraction of the effort that many of my competitors or many of pigeon fanciers do across the world, but I still can have a large amount of success. And to me, that's great. Like, it's almost, I like to see sometimes how little I can get away with and still have great success. Now, again, you need healthy pigeons, you need really good pigeons, but I do most of everything with me would be really good pigeons, naturally healthy pigeons, with shipping them to races with perfect body weight. And once I've nailed the perfect body weight, it's made the game so much easier.
Let's talk about the perfect body weight, and correct me on who mentored you on. You told a story on one of your videos that someone told you your pigeons were too heavy. You thought
Yeah,
that they were in great shape and they were ready to go, and he handled them. Who was that? I can't
yeah.
remember.
Well, this is well, many of you may have known Tony Malucci.
Malucci, that's what I was gonna say. Okay.
Tony Malucci is the greatest pigeon fancier that I have ever known. And
Right.
I've been around superstar pigeon fanciers. Tony, I was lucky to meet him when I was a kid. So going back to maybe the year 2000, so we're 24 years ago, I was entering a futurity race. And Tony was there. He was entering the same race. We didn't fly in the same combine at the time, but we would compete against New England Opens and certain futurity races. And I figured I would show off and have Tony put my birds. They were using counter marks at the time, I think. So have him put my birds in. So he, puts my pigeons in, and he wouldn't say a lot sometimes. And as he walks by me, he leans in and he says, "Too heavy." And I was like, those birds are too heavy. And I won a million races till that point. I mean, I had all kinds of success, and I'm thinking those pigeons were too heavy. So I started thinking, and then that was one point in the career. And another thing that I came about when I was racing widowhood in the 80s, I would feed the hens just 100% barley, and they lived in a little 3 foot by 3 foot section because I was in the city. I had a small loft, 12 by 16, and I did everything from that loft. And the hens were in this little section eating 100% barley. And I would go to get the hens to bring them into the widow cocks, and the hens felt better than the cocks. And I was like, well, wait a minute, they're sitting all week and these guys are on exercise. And I was feeding the old, the light to heavy, which like our grandfathers did.
Right.
So then I started changing. But even so, with my changing, the birds were still, as Tony said, were too heavy. They were better than most, but not like I shipped them today. I wish I mastered feeding 40 years ago. I could have, I mean, I had great success, but I think the success could have been much greater. And I say too, if you feed light to heavy, you're going to ship your birds to the races heavy. So that's kind of, something like that.
Well, what is your mixture that you prefer to keep them in that perfect weight range for the race?
Well, with me, I like to fly old birds. Young birds is mainly systems driven. If you race a dark system and, you're training them and you put the work in, and they fly really well, but it doesn't really show you what's good. Old birds, it's an even playing field. It's not really systems driven. Not that I don't race good systems, but everybody's on some type of system for old birds. So, I feed predominantly barley up through 300 miles. And you can buy a depurative mix, which is predominantly barley, or I mix my own, maybe like champion mix from Versal Lager, 30% champion, 70% barley. And they eat that 6 days a week. They're not getting on shipping for a 300-mile race. They're not eating fats and heavy feeds. It's like 6 hours. 6 hours for a pigeon is nothing with correct body weight. And they don't need a lot of fat to fly long distances. I will even feed on the day of shipping if a long distance race looks fast. And I'm saying, say a 400-mile race is going to be 8 hours, or a 500-mile race is going to be 10 hours. On the day of shipping, I'll even feed the light mix, the depurative mix. And then they'll eat on the truck, which I'm not sure if they eat or they don't. And they'll race, and I'll have pigeons, pour in at, feeding this mix. And it's tough for people to get their arms around. They're feeding heavy for like 100-mile races. And A bird can go out and fly 4 hours like nothing. When they're lightweight, I mean, that doesn't affect them at all, especially if the body weight is correct. So I feed it predominantly high quality barley, probably 70%, or I buy a good depurative. Sometimes I can't get barley and I can't mix my own, so I'll feed a depurative mix. But I alternate, and well, one has been as good as the other. It hasn't really mattered too much.
So you said 6 days. Which day are we switching it up?
So
Is that
on day
on the
of
return?
return, this was another, crazy old wives' tale. On day of return, my birds eat whatever they want. I load them up with Vercella Lager Champion. I give them the energy mix. I'll throw in whatever I have, rabbit pellets, chicken pellets. They can eat as much of whatever they want for one day a week. So my birds, they replenish. The most important meal after a big workout is the first meal. So my birds, really gorge when they return from the race, and they just eat that during all day when they return, and then they go right back to the barley mix the next day. For long distance races, because they're coming in, later, I'll let them eat the day of, and then the following day they'll have all the rich seeds. Because some of them are coming in, after 12 hours, they're not really that concerned with eating too much, so they get to eat Saturday evening and all day Sunday. But for every short race, one day a week, they get the rich feeds. It replenishes them. Then they're back on the, 70, sometimes 80% barley. And one secret that I do, not that it's a secret, I mean, I talk about it, but
Right.
occasionally, well, going back, if you're going to feed like me, though, you can't pound the birds down the road. Like my birds don't loft fly. So I can do a lot of winning without loft flying. And I train them Tuesdays and Thursdays. So they race on Saturday, they fly Tuesday, and they fly Thursday, maybe a 35-mile toss on Tuesday. I like them to fly an hour, which might be about a 50-mile toss on Thursday, and then they race again on Saturday. So to feed like me, you can't be pounding the birds down the road,
Right.
50 miles, 60 miles day after day. And the reason a lot of people have to pound their birds down the road is because they overfeed them. They don't need a lot of work if they're fed correctly. So then if we look like, say, we're going to have a week of rain, it's day after day after day of miserable weather. I put my birds on 100% barley so they don't gain weight. When my competitors are getting all big, fat, and round like apples, birds that are sitting after 2 days of eating the rich feeds, they'll blow out and you just can't get them back. So my birds never get round, never get full. The muscles are always lying almost flat. And yeah, that gives me a big advantage. So yeah, it looks like there's 5, 6, 7 days of rain. The race keeps getting postponed. Barley over day after day after day. Doesn't hurt them a bit. And it really helps. It gives you an advantage because everybody else's pigeons are like lead and mine are light as cork.
So if someone is loft flying, maybe they don't have the ability with their schedule to go down the road a couple times a week. If they're loft flying, would they have to increase the feed and not go 70-80% barley? How would you adjust if you weren't?
Yes. See, with my pigeons, I measure the feed. I don't give them, they're always a little hungry. If they're loft flying and they can't train, I recommend, because a bird flying 50 minutes around the loft is not the same work as flying 50 minutes off a training toss. The 50 minutes off a training toss is a good pumping, steady workout.
Right.
50 minutes around the loft, they're flying, but it's not as good. So I recommend if you can't if you can't train, exercise Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday morning, maybe for an hour, and feed the birds until they start to leave a handful of barley. So the birds will exercise. My birds won't exercise. Part of the reason are the hawks. The other reason is they're a little too hungry. Not that they're hungry, but they're a little hungry. I only feed them once a day. That's other big part of the whole feeding system. If you feed more than once a day, you're going to overfeed the birds. So my birds exercise. Well, they don't exercise around the loft, but they're fed very strict. But if you are loft flying, you can feed them until they leave a handful of barley. That's it for the day. They'll loft fly like crazy, and their body weight will still be excellent.
So what time, if your birds were to exercise or go down the road on a Tuesday, what time, if they get home, how long do you wait before you give them their daily feeding? Is that something you do 30 minutes after? Do you wait till the afternoon? Is it a time
No,
frame?
yeah, usually I let them run in and some of them will go to water. A lot of times they'll drink, and then if they go right to the feed, the water, they're so full of water, they kind of upchuck in the feeder. So I just wait a couple of minutes till the water settles in, and then I just feed them, and they're all set. And occasionally I'll wait. If they're broken up a little bit, I'll try to wait until the group is home. And but yeah, I don't wait or anything like that. And it's good to, you have to feed them after workout. It's important. Now, my birds, if they're only flying 35 minutes or an hour, the purative mix, the barley mix is great. If they fly, more than an hour and a half, I'll add some champion mix to it. Maybe go 50-50 champion mix, because they worked a little more than I had expected it to. Sometimes the tosses don't go exactly as planned.
Yeah, and that's one thing I tell people is that you can write down everything that a fancier does, a successful fancier does, but what you can't write down is the micro adjustments that you have to make depending on what happens on the day with the weather, with training. They aren't robots. Pigeons, some days they're just whatever reason will make a mistake, come home a little later, so you have to be able to adjust your feed at that point, right?
It's really true, and that's something that you can play with a little bit, and you gain knowledge over time. That's where if someone fed the birds until they started to leave a handful of barley, they really can't make a mistake. In the feeding program that I email out to my people that ask, it involves feeding them until they leave a little bit of barley, because again, I can touch the birds and know where they're at. I can also look at their crops after I feed them and know where they're at, where a newer fancy are better off feeding, like, my written out program, so they can't make a mistake. They'll still fly like crazy. And going back to what you said, Tom Brady, he was the quarterback for the New
Greatest of
England
all time.
Patriots. Yeah, and big fan, but needless to say, he said something one time that stuck to me. He said, at his point in the career, he knew all the answers to the test. Like when he looked at the defense, he knew what they were going to do before they did it, which gave him a huge advantage. And I think about, with my experience, I have the answers to the test already. Like I know how to make the adjustments and what I should do. And very rarely do I make a mistake. So that's why I'm trying to offer this to newer fanciers to help them, progress in the sport. And people like to keep secrets. And my competitors, they listen, and they've all changed their feeding. They feed like me, and then they have work all day with their pigeons. So it's tough, when your competitors are using your same systems. It gets tough, because I run to the lofts in the morning. I'll feed the race team. I'm there 5 minutes a day with the race team, except on the days we train. And usually my brother will take them on the training toss. He helps me with the birds. He's awesome. He locks them up at night. He gives them all their grits and minerals. He fills in the blanks for me, because I don't live at the lofts, and I don't go back a second time. I go in the morning, and that's it for the day.
And so what are you doing grit wise for your birds? Are you feeding grit every day after you feed them their mix, or when what do you have it available all the time? Tell us about the grit.
Yeah, the grits, I think the grits are the most important aspect of racing and breeding. Up until recently, most were missing out on all the minerals. And when I went to Belgium the first time in the late 80s, all the floors were pink. And I'm thinking, why are the loft floors pink? But at the time, we had never seen the vitamineral, the pink mineral, and all the different things. So my birds, they get all the minerals that you can imagine are in front of them at all times. I've got the pit pots. I've got a magnesium block. I've got the brown mineral blocks. My brother sometimes gives them the Kirkpatrick black minerals. The best mineral, the most important mineral on the market is the natural vitamineral. It's a pink mineral made by natural. It's the best of all the pink minerals. That's my favorite. And if you buy these mineral mixes like the Giovati, they take the pink mineral as the base, and then they add all kinds of different, like they break up everything I have in my feeders, they mix it together with some grit. And the problem is they add the treat seeds so the birds destroy it. But the minerals are the most important. Now with me, I replenish all the minerals on the day of return from the race. So they get all the Javati minerals they want, all the pick pots, all that stuff. And then on Tuesday, I'll replenish again. And then there's no fresh minerals again until Saturday, the day of return. You don't want them to be eating all that salt. And so I don't pull grits and minerals. I never take it away. If they need it, it's free choice. And they do, they take it when they need it. But I don't give it to the race team after Tuesday. No fresh minerals and grits. It's there. It's all fresh. It's perfectly fine. But whenever you go in with the fresh, say Javati mineral, they destroy it because of the treat seeds.
Right.
And I think they dehydrate a bit, and it's too much salt in their system. So, but twice a week, but it's always fresh. It's always in front of them.
And going back to what you said about, telling everyone your system and your feeding system and how others in your club are now doing it. I think one of the emails and phone calls I get consistently over the years is no one in my club will help me. No one in my area will help me. So I think what you're doing with your YouTube channel, what I'm doing with my YouTube channel, trying to help people give the knowledge that we've learned is one of the keys to the sport continuing for new or inexperienced flyers or people that may be experienced but wanting to improve. So I think that, despite the effect it's having in your local area, it's a big deal what you're doing, and it's really good.
Well, I appreciate it. And I feel it makes me better too. Like for me to beat, to be competitive and win races and stuff against really good guys on really good systems. I mean, I have to go to the next level. I don't want to be a big fish in a small pond.
Right.
Nobody can dominate really good competition. And in my area, we have like about 100-mile front from north to south. It goes about 50 miles deep. We race from the west. Wind can play a big factor. You have good seasons, you have good races, but nobody can dominate if the competition is fierce. And I have guys, two of the best fanciers in the area live in the same town as me. And I know if I can they sit a little bit in front of me. If I can beat those two guys, then I'm going to be right there, right at the top. And it's difficult when, a couple of the best are neighbors, more or less.
Right. And how many are in your club? Do you all have a club, combine, federation? How do you have it set up?
Yeah, we have, well, it's sad because I raced in the Boston Concourse forever. And it was when I was a kid, it was like 230 lofts and two big sections, north and south, with over 100 lofts. And then it ended up dwindling down. And now the Boston Concourse might have about 20 something, 25, 28 lofts. I race now in the Southern New England Combine. They might have 60 lofts or so. And we race New England Opens where they're combined liberations, where we can get bigger numbers, but the numbers are down. But my club is a really strong club. I would say the strongest club. The guys in my club, I mean, I could rattle off their names. There's 5 or 7 each week that could win the combine in my club. I'd rattle their names, but I'll forget somebody and then they'll hate me forever.
Right,
but
right. I understand.
I've got there's probably 17, 18 in my club, and nearly half are really competitive. They're serious pigeon fanciers.
Well, that's great. Whenever you're preparing for old birds like this, is there I know you said natural health, but is there anything you're doing medication wise pre-season to kind of prepare them? Is there respiratory or worming or vaccinating, anything that you're doing?
Well, starting in 2013, I decided to go completely antibiotic free. I said, that's it. I said, these pigeons lived for 1 million years without antibiotics. And I raced as a kid forever. And what did we have? We had nothing. We would worm them once a year and maybe give them a coccidiosis treatment. And we bred and we raced and we did everything that we did today. So in 2013, I said, no more flock treatments. Absolutely no antibiotics. So now I've had birds for, well, 11 years, antibiotic free. And I will treat a sick individual pigeon. Like I'll treat a sick one. I'll give it a shot one time. If it gets sick again, then it's a real weakling. I mean, occasionally a bird's going to get sick, and I'm not that bad that I wouldn't treat the bird. But with my system, I worm them and I vaccinate them before the old bird season for PMV, salmonella, and it's a combination vaccine, PMV, salmonella, bronchial. It's like a respiratory in there too. So I do vaccinate them before the season and I worm them, nothing else. There's no treatments before, during, or after the race season. There's no treatments before, during, or after breeding season other than worming and vaccinating. And I do the same thing with the breeders. They get the PMV salmonella bronchial vaccine before the breeding season. And I worm them with a moxidectin. It's a horse wormer, but it's really remarkable wormer.
Is that syringe down the throat, or how do you go about that?
No, I mix it in the water. I buy
Okay.
it's called Quest. It's a
Okay.
horse wormer. You could buy it at Tractor Supply.
I'm
And I
familiar
don't,
with
I,
that.
yeah, I don't buy the stuff with the tapeworm medication into it. In it, I just buy the regular moxidectin, and that tube will make about 7 gallons of water. So I'll mix it up. I'll put it in the blender. I'll whip it up because it's a gel. It doesn't dissolve very well. I'll whip it up. I'll put it in the water, usually leave it for 48 hours. And then 3 weeks later, I'll do it again. And usually they're pretty well set.
One of the products that you and I both use, and it's made a big improvement on my birds, is yellow drops. Are you still
Okay.
using yellow drops?
Yeah, it's funny that I am a big fan. I think it's great, and if you can get away, it's an antimicrobial, and if you can
Yeah.
get away with respiratory and canker treatments by giving the yellow drops, it's excellent. Now, this old bird season, I had a terrific old bird season. Like some of my hens were winning combines by 20 and 30 minutes at the long distance, and I did not do a thing. I gave them apple cider vinegar for 2 days when they returned from the race. Nothing mixed on the feed, not a single yellow drop, nothing. And the birds were amazing. But my birds have been antibiotic free for years.
Right.
So I would recommend a fancier that's just going antibiotic free. You have to use the natural products. I'm going to break out a really top oregano product. I'm going to do a video on that. It's an oregano and cinnamon combination. I love it. I've been experimenting with it. You have to use that. You have to use the yellow drops, the apple cider vinegar. And I was mixing like the cure oil from Comed with Win mix and brewer's yeast and flaxseed oil on the feed during the week. Again, I didn't do it one time this whole old bird season, but I think part of the reason is my birds are just stronger now. Like the average person going to natural health should use the natural products, should use the yellow drops, should use the oregano products and all that to keep the birds as healthy as possible until you get to the point where their immune systems are so strong it doesn't matter. And I think that's what it is. I think it didn't matter with my birds. I think their immune systems are just really strong right now.
Yeah, and I don't know of, and maybe I'm wrong, I don't know of a champion bird, a bird that's a super racer that had a lot of health issues in its life.
Well, it's very true. I feel with my system is I lose the weaklings because I don't medicate, because my youngsters never see a drop of medication. If they do have a respiratory or canker flares up, they're going to drop out of the population. They take themselves out of the population. So I don't have to worry about breeding from them or perpetuating their genetics because a lot of pigeons are successful, but they're successful because they've been kept healthy on, respiratory and canker meds, and they fly well and they have a great career. And then people breed from those pigeons. But you're right, the superstars, they're extremely healthy. I used to do import thousands of birds a year. And some birds would come out of quarantine and they'd look as beautiful as they went in, and others looked like death. The weaklings, the weaker
Right.
ones, they can't take it. And the superstars, they never change. And even if you went into, say, for example, you didn't feed your birds for a week, and they could live probably a fat pigeon could probably live 3 weeks without feed and water, which is pretty incredible. But I think that's how they get through the winters when everything's frozen and they can't find feed and stuff. But you could say you didn't feed your birds for 5 or 7 days. You just gave them water. You would go in. The superstars would handle exactly the same as they handled the week before, and the weaklings would be coming apart at the seams. They'd be just about ready to die. So the great ones is very little effect to their body, to their condition, to their, their overall constitution. That, yeah, they're indestructible, the great ones, pretty much. Like you say, they're always super healthy.
That's what my dad told me, the same example, that you could give them a few days off from feed and they're not going to change. Their body isn't going to start to shrink on them. They're going to have that buoyancy to them still, and that's what a champion athlete looks like. And so whenever the race season starts and you're having a pigeon that's performing really well, do you race every week on the same birds? Do you give them a week off if they perform well? There's different theories on that. How do you adjust?
I'll keep them rolling for all the shorter races up to about 7 hours on the wing. And then I tend to, when we get into the long distance, I'll split the team and then they'll race every other week. So my birds that are destined for the long distance races, we race 500, then 2 weeks later we race 400, 2 weeks later we race 500, 2 weeks later we race 500, 2 weeks later we race 600. The same birds will fly that series, but they have a week off in between. And I could probably ship them in between. Usually it's a shorter race, but after they fly about 7 hours, I usually go every other week, just because I don't push them that hard. I tend to, I think you may have seen some of the videos. I win with 4- and 5-year-old pigeons, like winning combines with 4- and 5-year-old birds. And a lot of it is the way I've treated them their whole lives. It's for every 2 hours on the wing, they get 1 day of total rest. So if they fly 6 hours, that's 3 days off, complete rest, locked in the loft. My long distance birds, when they fly a 500-mile race, say they fly 12 hours, and most people can't get their arms around it. They'll come home, they'll eat on the Saturday all they want. They'll eat on the Sunday. Then they go on the barley mix, and they'll be in the loft until the following Tuesday. What is that, like 9-10 days or something?
Mm-hmm.
They won't leave the loft. And I'll train them on Tuesday. I'll train them on Thursday. They'll go back to the next long distance race and be right at the top or win again. So in a 2-week period, they've had 2 flights.
Right.
2 weeks between races. And I do that the entire old bird season. So my old birds, they race. So I guess these hens that were dominating over that period of 4 races with a week in between, there was only 2 flights between each races. They probably only, they had 8 flights or something like that for the last however many weeks of the season between races. And if they're fed correctly, it's just, they can do amazing things.
Would you say long distance is your favorite form of racing?
Yeah, I think anything from 300 miles out. Short distance, a lot of it's system, and any pigeon can pretty much hang in there for 4 or 5 hours. But once you get to the long distance, it's the animal comes into play. You can prepare your birds like, the best imaginable, but very few are going to be able to go 12 hours and keep that pace. It really separates out the greatness. The long distance, you can see find the better birds. It's more pigeon and less handler the longer the race. Again, they have to be prepped well. They have to be a great pigeon. You want to give them every advantage, but the pigeon is more important at that point than the preparation.
I agree. I also like long distance because you can kind of guess as to a time frame, but there's a little bit more mystery involved than there is in the short races. Short races are much easier to predict when you're going to be getting them in, I feel like, than the long distance. Like those 600-mile, I've had several 600-mile races where it's about to be sunset. It's just starting to get dark and you'll have a bird come out of nowhere and hit the landing board. It's just an amazing feeling that I really enjoy.
It is very exciting. Yeah, the long distance is extremely exciting. And If you have a long distance pigeon that scores over and over at the distance, more often than not, that's going to be a super breeding pigeon. I mean, I've rarely, if ever, seen a great, like multiple long distance performer not be a superstar, because you know the genetics on that pigeon. It has great lungs, it has great endurance, it super immune system. It's got it. You're not guessing on that bird. I mean, a bird can hit a race, get lucky at a short distance, but long distance pigeons really, you can separate out the good from the bad pretty easily.
And so, what is your kind of pigeon when you're handling a pigeon, and you're trying to decide if this is something that maybe you're at an auction, maybe you're in Belgium wanting to bring another bird over. When you're holding a bird, what are you looking for? Do you have certain traits and characteristics that you look for and that you like?
Yeah, with me, I've been lucky. I mean, I've been to Belgium countless times. I've handled the best pigeons in the world. And one thing they all have in common is tremendous, soft, silky feather. So start with feather. And whether that feather quality is something that cuts through the air, like maybe there's less drag on a silky feathered bird than a bird that's not as silky feathered, I'm not sure. Maybe they can generate more speed. Maybe it's just the genetics and the health, and it comes out in the feather because it's born. You can't, you can feed them whatever you want, and you can't make that type of feather. So the gray
Right.
ones have feather. The gray ones are super buoyant. They are almost weightless. I don't know if you just very corky. Almost, I talk about it's like handling a water bottle that's full compared to like a water bottle that's empty. If you can pick the ones that feel they've got some muscle on them, but they're light and corky. And I don't like show qualities. Many pick birds with too much back, too much bone, too bulky, too heavy. They're flying. They're not carrying stuff. I mean, the bird should be lightweight. You want to have them strong but flexible. You don't want a big, heavy, strong back. They don't need that. Um, so the first thing I look for, very buoyant and a special feather quality, really, really high-end feather quality. And I tend to lean towards medium-sized pigeons. I don't try to go for the bigger birds. I mean, some big birds go on to be great breeders, and some even race well. But I'm one of the few lofts that has success in one loft racing, and I race my own birds. And I know if you ship them to one loft races, they usually, undertrained and overfed. So you want to ship a very medium-sized, buoyant, corky type bird, because those birds, they stay in condition. Where a heavy bird won't have a chance, or a big bird usually won't have a chance.
Well, I've noticed too that a lot of the one loft success, not all, but there's quite a bit that has long distance genetics. And I think it ties back into what you said, that the long distance pigeons have that within them to handle less training and be able to stay in shape and stay in form like you do on a long distance race. So that seems to me to translate to the one loft. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think in general, pigeons should probably have about 25% long distance blood in them. I found over all these years that my best pigeons always have a 25, somewhere in that area, 20% long distance or extreme long distance blood. It does add something to them. Even what I would call sprint pigeons, I like to have some of that distance birds, but you will see it. It's in the one-loft races, you never see the extreme long-distance birds scoring usually, but you will see, more the middle distance or sprint-type birds with a bit of long-distance scoring.
Yeah.
And but yeah, I think it's important. I'm not sure what it adds, whether it's homing or, like you say, the endurance factor or maybe the muscle quality, but there's something to it. It is important to have a little long-distance blood in your pigeons.
Well, I want to transition into your one loss. Before we do, I just thought of when you're mating up your breeder pairs, are you selecting on genotype, phenotype? What are you looking for when you're selecting? Are you basing on results, bloodlines? How do you go about it when you're selecting your breeders, or do you let them pick themselves?
Well, I let them pick themselves. I pair very few pair, and I'm lucky because I use two main breeding lofts. One has 3 sections, one has 1 section. So if I want to switch a pair, I may move a cock from one loft into the other loft because I know that hen is going to go back to that nest box and she'll mate to the same pigeon. So I can move cocks and hens between the two breeding lofts to break up pairs. 90, for myself, 99% of free mating. I'll put in, like, I'll have a breeding section and maybe put in nine cocks, 9 hens, let them pick their mates. They tend to know better than we do. And every hit pair I've ever had, they picked themselves. Like, it wasn't like I had some stroke of genius. And many of them, you take a youngster off the race team at the end of the season and it goes on to be a superstar, and that pair goes on to be great. And they were just a couple that, liked each other on the race team. So I free mate. Many of the top Europeans free mate. The other part of the reason that I do mostly free mating is because I don't live at the lofts. So I'm not there to rotate nests and break up
Right.
fights. And I will put a couple of pair together just to a certain reason, but most of the time it's just free mating. And then after a couple days, I give up because I'm not there and I can't rotate. And at
Right.
the end of the year, I'll do my individual pen pairing for sale. But I don't like inbred pigeons. I inbreed for sale like most of the Europeans do. They're not inbreeding for themselves. Everybody wants these inbred pigeons. And I've
Right.
done a video and I talk about it. There's never been an inbred pigeon that's been a game-changing pigeon in the sport. I mean, there's been some great inbred pigeons that breed winners and all that, but there's never been a pigeon that you'll talk about for 30 years, 40 years that was an inbred pigeon. There's not been one in the history of the sport. They're all total crosses. All these pigeons that went on to breed legacies of superstars are all total crosses. But yet the Americans, the English, the Chinese, they all want the inbred pigeons. So me too, I want the crosses for myself. And because there's such a demand for inbred pigeons, I will inbreed for sale.
And so, if you're putting the hens in and letting them select together, how do you prevent inbreeding? Are you selecting hens to where they're gonna, no matter what they choose, they'll be crossing out?
Yeah, well, with my smaller breeding sections, yeah, I try to do that. I might put only cocks from one type of bird in that group and just add hens that are unrelated. Occasionally I'll have, something will mate up and there'll be an inbred pair. And then I'll just say, well, those youngsters will be better for sale this year. I don't really want to race or enter them in one loft races, but it happens occasionally. But I keep a variety of birds, and most of my birds are crosses, and I try to get it so there's as few inbred birds as possible.
And once they select their mates, do you then go and kind of write down who's with who to have that on record once they've made their decision?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. As I keep the records of what's what, and I'd say most of the time I'm like, wow, that's a really good mating. Like they did better than like I
Right.
would. I wish I thought of that. And so, but I also tend to keep a lot of high-end pigeons. So if you shouldn't be keeping pigeons that you wouldn't want to send their babies to the Hoosiers, say, for example.
Yeah.
So I feel any of my pairs would have the potential of breeding a superstar. And every time I win a major one loft race, it's always a surprise. It isn't like from a pair. The pair may go on to be great pair after that, but it's not like, oh yeah, this pair had, been a super pair for, 5 years, then they breed a one loft winner. It seems like they hit first and then you're like, wow, that was special. And then they go on to be a good pair. So
And once they've proven themselves, those are some of the pairs that you might try to redo down.
yeah, well, if I just throwing them back in the section, they'll remate
They'll do it themselves.
the way they were. But even so, I switch them up. One of the big mistakes I feel I made when I was a kid, I had some really good pigeons and some really good pairs. And I imported birds from Jermaine Imbreck I got them in 1983, and a couple of them were unbelievable. They were like game changing for me. And I had a favorite pigeon from the mid 70s that was everything from him. His children, his grandchildren just blew everybody away. Just incredible. But I kept the pairs together like their whole lives. So then I didn't really have anywhere to go. Like everything was like the same. So now I keep swapping them. I keep switching them. Even my best pairs, I'll change them. because I think they're good pigeons, and maybe they should hit with something else. So I have a lot of variation, a lot of different types of birds. And over time, it isn't like I have 5 years of youngsters from the same pair. I might have multiple different breedings from my best pigeons. I think it helps me move forward.
Let's transition into one loft. So we talked about what kind of pigeon that you like, the medium size that, has the ability to have strong immunity, be able to handle less training and more feed and all those things. Let's talk about, when did you start doing one lofts as far as, having the success you've been having? When did it kind of begin for you there?
Well, I mean, I'm trying to think when we started with the one lofts. It's been a while. It's been over 20 years, I would think. I, but more recently, I think probably from, yeah, the 2012, 14 on, more
Right.
serious. But I think one loft racing has become more serious since then anyways. And at the time, when I first started entering conventions and one loft races and stuff, I think that I just had better pigeons than everybody else. So years ago, you could have a lot of success if you had the pigeons. Now everybody has really good pigeons. You can go to any loft and they have good pigeons. It wasn't like that 30 years ago. Definitely wasn't like it 40 years ago. Even 20 years ago, many fanciers didn't have really good pigeons, but now everywhere, everybody has good birds. So one loft races are tough. It's hard to compete, but you have to do everything in your power to give the bird the best advantage by caring for the breeders correctly, making sure they never miss a feeding, vaccinating the babies before the race, plenty of vitamins and minerals, not necessarily vitamins, they get that from the feed, but plenty of minerals,
Minerals.
and just give yourself as much as of an advantage as possible. And then don't ship them too young. Too many fanciers send them, they're just like little squeakers. They're not going to lose them at the one loft race. The loft's sit in the middle of nowhere. There's thousands of birds there. Those pigeons aren't going to leave. So you're better off shipping them 6 weeks old or even older to the one loft races. Let their immunity build up, let them be stronger, and let the vaccinations have kicked in and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I think that's perfect advice. That's what I tell people is a lot of times people are sending them way too young. They haven't built up their immune system yet. And obviously don't overcrowd your boxes when you're shipping them.
Well, that's a really good point. People will enter a very expensive race and want to
Right.
save $20 on shipping,
Hmm.
and the birds are cooked. It's
Right.
over before they even arrive. I
Of course not.
exported thousands of birds to South Africa for both the South African $1 million race, the Victoria Falls, and I'd get pigeons sometimes, and they go into the biggest race in the world, and someone's trying to save a few dollars on shipping by cramming them in the boxes in the summer. And I knew they were finished. It was over before they even started, which was sad because it's expensive.
Yeah. What's the difference, in your opinion, between a one loft winning pigeon and a club winning pigeon? Is there a difference to you in the two types?
No, I mean, they're the same pigeons. I know that a lot of people think, oh, they have to buy one loft pigeons, but all these famous one loft bloodlines say they all became famous racing federations and national races long before they got to the one loft races. They didn't just jump up winning one loft races. So it's pretty much the same pigeon. Although I think with one loft racing and pigeons in general, there's horses for courses. So if you find pigeons that are excelling in the Hoosier or at Victoria Falls, a lot of times the same bloodlines or relatives of those pigeons will also do well in those conditions. So I would focus a lot on the race and see if you can find pigeons that suit, that race. But they're pretty much the same birds. The same birds I'm winning with are the same pigeons that I'm winning in one loft races with. They're winning combines and then they're scoring in one loft races. So it's all for me, because I race my own birds, it's all the same birds. Most of the one loft fanciers out there, all the big guys, the big names, they don't race their own pigeons. So they're just entering them in one loft. So it looks more like a one loft family of pigeons or one loft winners exclusively. But the same birds will win in both situations, I would think.
If you get a one loft winner, let's say you have a bird that wins at the Hoosier or wins in Texas, would you then get that bird back and its youngsters then go back to that same area to try to go that way for the course?
Yeah, no, it's true. More often than not, that's what works. And a lot of people, we saw it with the South African $1 million pigeon race, where people started buying the top birds in that race and sending their offspring back to that race and having more success in the race. So yeah, I would recommend, if you were concentrating on a race, to get some pigeons that have been somewhat successful. They don't necessarily have to be the winners of the race, but if they finish the series and were competitive and have the um, immune systems and all that, they, more often than not, they can do all right if you send babies back to a certain race.
One of my best breeding hens that I have, she's bred Federation Combine winners. She's bred one loft winners already in the first couple years being in the breeding loft. She competed at the Hoosier, and she had one really competitive race and then a couple not so competitive. But when I got her back, she just felt so nice, and she survived the Hoosier series when a lot of birds don't. So I thought, I'm just going to give her a shot, and she's turned out to be one of my best breeders. So I think it's interesting how sometimes, the results aren't always going to show you what they do as breeders. Have you found that at all?
Yeah, you will see that. I mean, sometimes for some reason, the bird might not perform and go on to be a great pigeon. And another example would be, I had a hen, I liked her, a celibate hen, and she raced for 3 years, and she was never even close. But because I had Rome, I kept her on the team. And then as a 4-year-old and a 5-year-old, she tore it up. She was amazing. She just won everything in sight. And I'm thinking, well, most everybody would have given up on that. Now I'm breeding from her. She'll probably be a great breeder, but your hen, maybe under different circumstances or as an old bird, might have been a tremendous pigeon.
Right.
So it's tough to say, but you see that a lot. If they finish the series, and to finish the series in a lot of cases, they have to be a good pigeon. Many of them don't. I mean, they just
Right.
don't make it.
Yeah, especially at the big races where there's thousands and thousands of pigeons. If your bird's one of the ones that finishes the series, that in itself is an accomplishment.
I feel the same way. And then, some birds, though, they'll be generations of winners. They're good. Their children are good. Their grandchildren are good, and it just keeps going on and on. And like, I've got a hen. She was well, equal first at the Empire Classic in Canada. It was a headwind race. There were 3 in a drop, and then she's unbelievable breeding hen, all kinds of winners. But then she bred a hen that won the Big Andy 451-mile race, and then that hen bred the pigeon that won the Hoosier with 2 on a drop, and they were like 8 minutes out in front. And then now I've got generations more of winners down from them. I just got a report from, one of my birds won GHC down there, 1,660 birds or something, the 250, down from the same, another grandchild of the hen that bred the Hoosier winner in there. Now it just keeps going and going. And some of them are just good, and it just keeps going for generations.
Were you at the Hoosier when that happened? Were you in person there?
No, because of COVID, they only had a few witnesses there.
Ah, okay.
So it's a funny story that, I was so busy that day, I forgot about the Hoosier. I was so slammed.
Yeah.
And I forgot the race was going off, and I was fried. And I see my phone was ringing. It was Mike Ganis. And so I see Ganis on the phone, and I pick up and I say, and I still forgot about the race. I was so out of it. And he says, and he's like, "Frank, you just won the Hoosier." And I said, "Really?" I said, "That's awesome." I said, so then the first thing I thought, how many on a drop? Because I'm thinking, what, 50?
Yeah,
what's
right,
the big
right.
deal? And he said 2, and I'm like, yes.
Yeah, that
And my bird went in first, and 2 years before, because they had the lock problem in between, but 2
right.
years before, in 2018, I won, but it was a big drop. So the whole world, including my wife, thought we won like 250,000, and it turned out to be whatever. After we split with my partner and my brother, it was like, we got 5,000 for winning the Hoosier.
Right.
But the second time was a lot more impressive and, pretty exciting.
And you I think you won the Flying D a few years ago, right? With a hen?
No, I haven't won the Flying D.
I thought you had one on the first drop or something. Maybe I'm wrong, but
No, not. I'll keep trying. Not too much luck with that. I mean, we've had some good luck with winning a couple of conventions and the High Desert, Big Andy's race, and couple Hoosier wins, Fast Eddie's. There's been a pile of all the. I had a bird last year on the drop at the Florida Derby. I did a video recently. I was rounding up some of the one loft winners to show the one loft winners, and because a lot of them get sold, or I sold them after the race, or whatnot, but I still have a bunch of them, around the River Valley Challenge. We won that a couple times, but it's been fun. My brother is the one loft guy. I breed them. He enters them. He's the gambler.
what's his
So
name again?
my brother Dan, he's a huge
Dan.
help for
And
me.
I
Yeah,
met him in at the Hoosier, right? He was with you. Okay.
yeah. He's my partner in this stuff, and I do most of the bird, the care and all that, but he's a huge help. He's got a good eye for the birds too. And I call him the mineral king. He keeps those minerals up in the breeders. I waste more minerals than most people would ever feed, but he's really good with the grits and minerals. He knows how important it is. So
That's what I tell people all the time is that you're going to waste a lot of it, but boy, it's worth it. It's such
yeah.
so much better for the birds, especially the breeders when feeding babies.
And I tell them too, you can almost feed anything if you have all those grits and minerals in front of the birds, and then you feed a decent grain mix, you're going to raise beautiful babies.
Yeah.
Whereas a lot of people, they feed a high-end grain and then they have a granite grit mix, which
Right.
I hate. You should, if at
Right.
all possible, people shouldn't feed that crushed granite. It's all sharp, where the grit should be round stones. And I get the Belgian grit, the grit and redstone, which I'm lucky to be able to have it delivered. But it's important, and you can raise some beautiful babies. And my birds don't break down. Like, I'll pair them in January and breed them until September. They'll breed through the heat of the summer. They'll breed through the molt, which most fanciers wouldn't do that, but I let them breed, and not a problem. Health is beautiful. They don't, if they start to break down and losing weight, usually they're mineral deficient. So the minerals will really help the birds.
So if you were to start over 2024, let's say that you're just getting started again, maybe you moved to California or something. What do you have advice? What advice do you have for new flyers, people that are starting out in 2024? What would you do? Where would you begin? How would you go about it? Because my audience, I'm sure yours is the same. We have our experienced flyers, but we also have our new guys are in the middle that are trying to improve, get better, learn.
Well, I think, I tell a lot of new fanciers that are starting out, I said, buy late hatches and buy them from a good loft off the race team. Like, everybody gets so crazy about, the breeders. And I raised a team off my race team. I put my celibate hens with the celibate cocks and raised around of late hatches. They flew so well. I said, I'll get around of late hatches. And you can barely give those away.
Yeah.
And but in a couple years, that race team will be my breeding pigeons. They'll be the next stars of the loft. And I would suggest go to a good loft and try to buy late breds off the race team. And that's the most inexpensive way to do it. And try to buy, even if I'm buying breeders, all the years I would go to Belgium and stuff, I'd buy late breds. Yeah, I got to wait maybe a year to breed from them, but you have more to select from, and you get a better deal on late breds from the best pigeons over. Everything looks good at 6 months old, but babies, boy, I like to select right out of the nest. If you let me select pigeons out of the nest, I'll select the champions every time. Not that not, you know what I mean, but I'd much rather select out
Right.
of the nest. And again, I can select adult pigeons too, but the ones that are super out of the nest are really special birds.
So for the new guys, if you're getting those late hatches, do they need to go to somebody in their area where the birds are working in that area, or would you just try to anything you can find from top guys around the country, maybe?
I mean, I think it'd be best to find fanciers in your area that are racing that race course and buy like off their race team. and you know, hopefully get a good deal. And I also advocate, don't buy from the person that's the professional that's working with the birds, you know, 24/7. If you can find his neighbor that maybe has a family and is busy all the time, but still pretty competitive. You
Right.
know, that guy has some good birds there. Over, you know, there's a lot of people that, you know, they all they do are work with the pigeons. So it's a little deceiving sometimes on the results. But yeah, I would buy local. And I've been looking at, you know, epigenetics, and there are things passed in our genes, like experiences are passed in our genes.
Yeah.
And I don't know if like a race course experience is passed or pigeons that have been successful. I think some of these successful one loft race bloodlines and local pigeons, like if you breed from your race team, more likely than not, those youngsters will fly better than your breeders. So are they passing something in their genetics? It's almost like a form of a memory passed within the genetics. And there's been a lot of studies done, and they're trying to figure out exactly how this works, but there's something to it. So there is probably an advantage to buying birds off the race course that you're going to fly.
Yeah.
I think it could be helpful to get, you know, a better start.
Makes sense. Well, is there anything else that we haven't covered that you'd like to add to the conversation? Anything I missed that you want to talk about?
Well, I think that people make the game too difficult for themselves. It's not that difficult. If they have proper body weight, they're trained adequately, and they're healthy, they should be competitive. So you don't want to make it too difficult. And I know with the new fanciers, I'll give an example. They change all the time. They have a bad race and they make changes. So during this old bird season, I had these hens that I won a 400-mile race, and they were way in front. And the next week, it was a quick 400-mile race. It might have been 8 or 9 hours. And the following week was a 300-mile race. And I said, you know what? I'm going to ship the best 3 hens back to that 300. And I put them in the 3 and they failed. Like I was late. And I said, wow, these pigeons are late. Now, the young fancier would have, oh, I have to medicate. I have to maybe treat them for canker. And I said, there's nothing wrong with these pigeons. They had a bad race. And after talking to the truck driver, he said, oh, we let them out and the birds split into 2 flocks and some of them landed in the trees. So I'm thinking maybe there was a falcon attack that split the flock. Birds don't land in the trees.
Right.
And so then the following week, these same birds dominated the combine again. They were like winning by 20, 30 minutes and a 500-mile race. So if I made a change after that one-off week, if I threw medicine at them or something, I probably would have followed them up for the season. So stick to it. Don't change constantly. Keep them healthy. Feed them correctly, train them moderately, and you can have success in this sport. It's really not that difficult. People make it way, way too difficult. And a lot of the fanciers out there, especially the retired or the old timers, I mean, they're training every day. And somebody starting out with a full-time job and a young family, it can't be done. You can't copy what some of the old timers do. So maybe, you know, copy more of like what I do. And one of my friends teases me all the time that you're lazy. Well, I'm not lazy. I just want to get as much out of them as I can with as little effort as I can. So
Absolutely. And so if people want to check you out, let's hear your website, YouTube.
yeah, well, my YouTube is McLaughlin Lofts, McLaughlin, then LOFTS, McLaughlin Lofts. My website is McLaughlinLofts.com. And I also have my pigeon auction site, Best Pigeons, which many may have seen. I actually own bestpigeons.com. So between that stuff, it keeps me busy. But I hope, yeah, people check out the YouTube page. And a lot of information there. We've just touched on I think I have about 130 videos probably on all different aspects of the sport.
Well, and I think it's important even for people who are experienced and have had a lot of success to always listen to someone like you that's had your success, and if they can pull out one piece of information from it that can help them, then it's a big deal. And I think that's my favorite part of having these conversations, is to hear what someone in Belgium is doing, what someone in Boston area is doing, you know, what someone in the Oklahoma area, California. So it's a lot of fun to hear all this and to pass your knowledge on. I just really appreciate it. I know the audience does too. And if you're up for it in the future, let's have you back on and do this again. Maybe update on how your racing season's going and keep talking. So
Yeah, I would love to do it. I mean, we just, like you said, we just scratched the surface, but if I can help, the sport's been really good to me, and I like to give back, and I do appreciate it. I was honored to be asked, and yeah, let's do it again, maybe mid-season or something like that.
sounds great, Frank. And again, I appreciate it. I know the audience appreciates it, and we'll have you back on and keep talking pigeons. I love it. So thank you so much.
Sounds good. Thank
All right.
you.
Have a great rest of your day.
You too.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye-bye.